Listen to the water. If you are lying in the dark right now, simply close your eyes and let the heavy silence of the night wash over you. Imagine, for a moment, the vast, ink-black expanse of the Red Sea tonight. You can hear the deep, rhythmic hum of a modern steel cargo ship slowly cutting through the heavy waves. It is a solitary titan of commerce, illuminated only by the pale, cold light of the moon. It feels safe. It feels impenetrable. But the ocean has a long memory. The water that crashes against that steel hull is the exact same water that once swallowed the cries of forgotten sailors, more than 2 centuries ago. History, you see, is not a straight line. It is a slow, churning whirlpool, always returning to the same dark currents. Tonight, we will not speak of the missiles or the drones that scar the modern sky. Instead, we will drift backward, far backward, to a time when the most powerful navy the world has ever known was born not from a desire for conquest, but from a place of absolute, shivering desperation. So, pull your blanket a little tighter. Let your shoulders sink into the mattress. Breathe in and let go. We are sailing into the late 18th century. The year is 1785. The United States of America is barely a whisper on the global stage. We often imagine the birth of this nation through the grand lens of triumph, picturing fireworks, victorious generals, and the signing of sacred parchment. But the reality, hidden in the quiet corners of history, was far colder and much more fragile. Picture a dimly lit room in Philadelphia. Outside, a bitter winter wind howls through the cobblestone streets, rattling the wooden window frames. Inside, the fire in the hearth is dying down, reducing to a soft, glowing pile of embers that occasionally crackles in the absolute stillness. Thomas Jefferson, a man whose intellect helped forge a nation, sits alone at a heavy oak desk. The faint smell of melted wax and old ink hangs heavy in the air. He traces his fingers over a map of the world, his brow furrowed in a deep, agonizing silence. The Revolutionary War is over. The British have retreated. The celebrations have long since faded into the harsh reality of survival. Independence, they were quickly learning, was a double-edged sword. For decades, American merchant ships had sailed the globe under the invincible shadow of the British Royal Navy. The Union Jack fluttering at the mast was a shield, an absolute guarantee of safe passage across the treacherous waters of the world. But now, that shield is gone. The young republic is entirely alone. There is no American Navy. In a desperate bid to save a completely depleted national treasury, the Continental Naval Forces had been disbanded, their ships sold for scrap wood. The sea, once a highway of prosperity, has suddenly become a dark, terrifying abyss. The American merchant vessels, loaded with wheat, tobacco, and hope, are setting sail into the Mediterranean Sea completely naked, entirely defenseless. Think about the profound isolation of a wooden ship in the middle of the sea. There are no radios. There is no radar. Just the endless, suffocating horizon, the creaking of the timber, and the constant rhythmic slapping of the cold waves against the hull. The sailors aboard these ships are simple men, staring out into the dense morning fog, completely unaware that they are sailing directly into a trap that has been set for centuries. On the northern coast of Africa, along the shores of what was known as the Barbary Coast, an ancient and ruthless system of power is waiting. The rulers of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli do not care about the grand ideals of liberty or democracy. To them, the ocean is a hunting ground, and the ships of this new, unprotected nation are nothing more than floating chests of gold and flesh. Jefferson knows this. Staring at the map in the quiet, agonizing solitude of his study, he understands a terrifying truth. The independence they bled for on land means absolutely nothing if they cannot survive the water. The nation is completely broke. They cannot afford to build ships. They cannot afford to fight. And yet, they are about to face an enemy that only speaks the language of violence and extortion. It is a profound historical irony. The foundation of future global dominance is being laid in a moment of pure, unadulterated vulnerability. The men who wrote the Constitution are being forced to realize that the world does not respect ideals, it only respects power. And power, in the late 18th century, is measured in iron, oak, and gunpowder. The corsairs waiting in the Mediterranean are not mindless pirates of folklore, they are state-sponsored privateers, the sharp claws of the Barbary states. For generations, European powers had played a cynical game with these North African rulers, paying massive tributes, essentially protection money, to ensure their own ships were spared, while secretly hoping the corsairs would prey on their commercial rivals. It is a dark, calculated chessboard of global economics, played with human lives. And now, a new, fragile pawn has stumbled onto the board. As the embers in Jefferson's fireplace finally burn out, plunging the room into darkness, across the Atlantic, a different kind of darkness is falling. A heavy, suffocating fog rolls over the Mediterranean. A lone American merchant ship, the Maria, is drifting slowly through the silent waters. The crew is asleep, lulled by the gentle rocking of the ocean. But in the distance, cutting through the fog without a single sound, the sleek, predatory silhouettes of corsair galleys are approaching. They do not fly the flag of a recognized nation, they fly the colors of survival and greed. The water is perfectly still. The wind has died down. There is nowhere to run. Imagine the sheer terror of that moment on the Maria. The sudden, violent shattering of the night's peace. The guttural shouts in a language they do not understand. The terrifying thud of grappling hooks biting deep into the wooden deck. In an instant, free men, citizens of a nation that just declared that all men are created equal, are dragged into the dark, suffocating hold of an alien vessel. They are no longer sailors. They are currency. They are cargo. The ocean, in its infinite indifference, simply absorbs the struggle. The waves continue to roll, washing away the struggle on the deck. The wind continues to blow, carrying the corsair ships back toward the labyrinthine ports of Algiers. The sea does not judge the pirate, nor does it pity the captive. It simply exists, a vast, terrifying mirror reflecting the endless cycle of human ambition and cruelty. This is the true cost of entering the world, a cost not measured in treaties or debates, but in the slow, agonizing sound of iron chains dragging across a stone floor in a foreign prison. To buy a fragile illusion of peace, they were forced to use their own bleeding economy to feed the very predators that were hunting them in the dark. Think about the men of the Maria and another captured ship, the Dauphin. They were pulled from the vast, open freedom of the Atlantic and violently thrust into the suffocating reality of Algiers. Imagine the heavy, suffocating heat of the North African coast. The air there is thick, smelling of crushed spices, salt, and the sweat of thousands of forgotten souls. The American sailors, men who had charted the stars and ridden the great gales, were stripped of their names. They were marched in heavy iron chains through the labyrinthine, sun-baked streets, their bare feet bleeding on the hot stones. Deep beneath the bustling markets, in the cold, damp stone dungeons known as the Bagnios, time simply stopped. Listen to the steady, maddening drip of water from the arched stone ceiling. It echoes in the dark, a cruel reminder of the ocean they might never see again. The physical labor was brutal, breaking rocks under the merciless sun. But the psychological torture was far heavier. They were utterly forgotten. They knew that their letters home, written on scrap paper with trembling hands, would likely never survive the journey across the sea. They were ghosts, haunting a world that did not care if they lived or died. Now, shift your gaze away from the damp darkness of the dungeon, float upward, past the stone walls, into the opulent chambers of the Dey of Algiers, the supreme ruler of this pirate state. The contrast is jarring, yet completely silent. The floor is covered in thick, woven Persian rugs that swallow the sound of footsteps. The air is heavy, but not with despair. It is thick with the sweet, intoxicating smoke of burning frankincense and myrrh. The Dey sits on a pile of silk cushions, slowly sipping hot mint tea from a delicate silver cup. He is not a monster in his own eyes. He is a businessman. To him, the captured American ships are not tragedies. The enslaved men weeping in the dark are not human beings. They are simply commodities, numbers carefully recorded in a leather-bound ledger. He views the young United States with an amused, cold indifference. They are weak, they are far away, and they have no warships to defend themselves. Therefore, they must pay the price of the ocean. Back across the Atlantic, in the quiet, candlelit rooms of the American government, the reality of this extortion is settling in like a heavy winter snow. The letters from the captives eventually arrive, their ink smeared by time and tears. The words strike the hearts of men like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington with a sickening thud. The helplessness is absolute. The public is outraged, yet the treasury is completely empty. This is the silent pivot of history, when ideals are crushed by the cold weight of reality. The United States, a nation that proudly declared its liberty from a tyrant king, realizes it must now bow its head to a warlord. The negotiations drag on for years, a slow, agonizing dance of diplomacy conducted through letters that take months to cross the ocean. Every month that passes means another month of suffering in the dark Bagnios. Finally, exhausted and cornered, the young nation capitulates. They sign the Treaty of Tripoli and similar agreements with Algiers and Tunis. Imagine the heavy scratch of the quill on the parchment. It is the sound of humiliation. The terms are staggering. The United States agrees to pay an initial ransom of tens of thousands of dollars, a sum that represents a massive fraction of the entire national budget, but it does not end there. They agree to pay an annual tribute, a yearly tax of protection, delivered in gold, silver, and, ironically, naval supplies. They are literally giving the corsairs the timber and canvas they need to build more ships, to hunt more prey. It is an extortion on a grand scale, cloaked in the polite language of diplomacy. The chests of silver coins are carefully loaded onto merchant ships, the metal clinking softly in the wooden crates. It is blood money, paid in the desperate hope that the wolves will be satisfied and look the other way. But deep down, in the silent, reflective hours of the night, Jefferson knows the truth. You cannot buy the goodwill of a predator. You can only rent it. The piece they have purchased is a fragile glass house, built on a foundation of shifting sand. The tribute is not a solution. It is a slow, festering wound on the pride of a nation. The ocean remains quiet for a little while. The American merchant ships cautiously return to the Mediterranean, carrying their papers of safe passage, nervously watching the horizon. The captives, those who survived the brutal years in the dungeons, are finally brought home, their bodies broken, their eyes hollow, with memories they can never articulate. The debt has been paid. The ledgers are momentarily balanced, but human greed, much like the tide, inevitably returns. The rulers of the Barbary Coast have tasted the weakness of the new republic. They have seen the silver flow, and in the opulent palaces, thick with incense, a new thought begins to form. Why settle for a fraction when the victim is too weak to say no? The storm has not passed. It is merely gathering strength just beyond the horizon, waiting for a single, unpredictable breeze to push it forward. Human greed is exactly like seawater. For the more you drink, the thirstier you become. And the ultimate price of appeasement, as history always whispers, is an unavoidable war. Let us move forward slightly in time. The century has turned. It is now 1801. A new era is dawning, but the old, heavy shadows still cling to the young republic. Thomas Jefferson is no longer just a frustrated diplomat agonizing in a dark, cold room in Philadelphia. He has ascended to the highest office. He is now the President of the United States. And he has inherited a nightmare. He has inherited the humiliating treaties, the broken men returning from the dungeons, and the constant, bleeding drain of silver flowing eastward across the Atlantic Ocean. In Tripoli, the balance of power is shifting, driven by a simple, dangerous emotion: jealousy. The Pasha of Tripoli, observing the massive tributes being paid to his neighbor in Algiers, feels slighted. He looks at the chests of American silver and decides that it is simply not enough. He demands more. He wants a larger share of the blood money. He wants more gold, more naval supplies, more total submission from the nation across the sea. When the American consul bravely, or perhaps desperately, refuses this sudden demand, the Pasha does not scream. He does not send a formal, politely worded declaration of war. Instead, he performs a deliberate, deeply symbolic act of violence. Imagine the heavy, dusty, suffocating heat of the courtyard outside the American consulate in Tripoli. The sun beats down mercilessly on the dry earth. The air is entirely still. Suddenly, the silence is shattered by the sharp, metallic ring of an iron axe biting violently into solid wood. With a few heavy, echoing strikes, the tall wooden flagpole flying the stars and stripes is brutally chopped down. Listen to the heavy thud as the wooden pole crashes into the dry dust. It is not just a piece of fabric and wood falling to the ground. It is a silent, deafening challenge. It is the end of the illusion of peace. Back in Washington, the news arrives months later, carried by weary ships and exhausted messengers. It does not arrive with a roar, but with a cold, terrifying clarity. The era of paying for the right to exist on the ocean is finally over. The United States, pushed completely into a corner, realizes a profound truth. If they want to survive, if they want to truly be an independent nation, they can no longer play the role of the victim. They must build their own shield. Let us transport ourselves away from the dusty, hostile streets of Tripoli and drift towards the dense, misty coastal forests of Georgia and the Carolinas. Feel the sudden drop in temperature. Breathe in the cool, damp morning air. Listen to the haunting, solitary calls of distant seabirds echoing through the ancient, moss-draped trees. Here, far away from the halls of power, the true foundation of American naval strength is being quietly, meticulously carved directly from the earth. The air smells richly of wet soil, decaying leaves, and crushed pine needles. Close your eyes and listen to the slow, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of heavy iron axes striking impossibly hard wood. The men are harvesting the southern live oak. This is not ordinary timber. It is incredibly dense, deeply unforgiving, and so heavy that it will sink if dropped in the water. Its twisted, complex grain makes it almost impossible to split. It is the perfect, impenetrable armor for a new, untested breed of warship. Now, let the scene fade and drift slowly northward to the bustling, smoke-filled shipyards of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. The atmosphere changes completely. The quiet forest is replaced by a symphony of intense human labor. Listen to the rhythmic, hypnotic clanging of blacksmiths' hammers, metal striking glowing, red-hot iron. Hear the sharp, violent hiss of steam as the superheated metal is plunged deep into vats of cold, dark water. Sparks fly wildly in the dim, soot-stained light, briefly illuminating the tired, determined faces of men who are building something their nation has never built before. They are constructing the first 6 heavy frigates of the United States Navy. Among them is a massive vessel that will one day become a legend, the USS Constitution. Imagine the sheer, overwhelming scale of her wooden ribs rising slowly in the dry dock like the skeleton of a great leviathan. Breathe in the sharp, pungent smell of boiling pitch and hot tar being slathered over the wooden seams to make the hull watertight. Listen to the slow, methodical creaking of miles of thick hemp rope being woven and pulled tight by calloused hands. Every single swing of the hammer, every tightening of an iron bolt, every drop of sweat falling onto the wooden deck is a quiet, powerful act of defiance against the profound fear that has gripped the nation for so long. The psychology of the country is shifting, slowly but inevitably. They are no longer a shivering republic, hiding behind treaties and tribute. They are deliberately forging a weapon. The transition is profound. For years, they sat in the dark, helpless, waiting for the predators to strike in the fog. Now, they are actively preparing to cross the ocean, to sail directly into the storm, and to bring the fire straight to the wolves' den. It is a tense, breathless period of preparation. The massive ships are slowly fitted out. Down in the cramped, dark gun decks, The heavy iron cannons are carefully lowered into place. They are cold to the touch, silent, waiting to speak. The massive canvas sails are folded neatly, waiting for the wind to carry them eastward. It is the heavy, agonizing calm before the inevitable, violent clash. The ocean is waiting. And soon, very soon, the fresh wood and new iron of the young republic will meet the ancient stone and ruthless steel of the Barbary Coast. The Mediterranean Sea is vast, deep, and deeply unforgiving. It does not care about the flags painted on a piece of canvas, nor does it care about the desperate hopes of a young nation. In the late autumn of 1803, the heavy, dark reality of naval warfare finally arrived off the coast of North Africa. The USS Philadelphia, one of the magnificent new frigates built from the dense southern oak, was patrolling the waters near Tripoli. She was a floating fortress, a symbol of American defiance. But the ocean holds secrets that maps do not show. Imagine the sudden, sickening sound of disaster. It is not the roar of a cannon, but a deep, violent, grinding scrape of wood against solid, unyielding rock. The ship violently shudders. The massive wooden masts groan under the sudden deceleration. The Philadelphia has struck an uncharted reef. She is hopelessly, desperately stuck. Listen to the frantic, panicked shouts of the crew echoing over the cold water. They desperately heave heavy iron cannons over the side, watching them sink into the dark abyss in a futile attempt to lighten the ship. They cut down the majestic masts, the heavy timber crashing into the sea, but the tide is against them. The ship remains paralyzed. And then, out of the gathering fog, the predators arrive. Small, maneuverable corsair gunboats swarm the stranded giant like wolves surrounding a wounded stag. The American captain, William Bainbridge, facing total destruction and the slaughter of his men, makes the heaviest decision a commander can make. He strikes his colors. He surrenders. Feel the profound, suffocating despair as over 300 American sailors are dragged from their proud ship. They are marched in heavy chains through the dusty streets of Tripoli, the heavy iron doors of the Pasha's dungeon slamming shut behind them. But the true tragedy, the ultimate humiliation, sits out in the harbor. The Pasha of Tripoli now possesses a fully intact American heavy frigate. He plans to use it to hunt the very people who built it. This is the lowest point. The darkness is absolute. The young republic's grand attempt at defiance has ended in an unmitigated disaster. But history is often shaped in the darkest hours by men who refuse to accept the inevitable. Months pass. It is now February 1804. The winter air over the Mediterranean is brutally cold, slicing right through the thin wool coats of the sailors. The night is pitch black. There is no moon. A thick, heavy fog rolls across the harbour of Tripoli, swallowing the stars. A small, captured ketch, renamed the Intrepid, is moving silently through the dark water. Aboard are Lieutenant Stephen Decatur and a hand-picked crew of volunteers. They know this is likely a suicide mission. They are sailing directly into the heart of the enemy stronghold, surrounded by hundreds of heavy cannons resting in the stone forts. The tension is suffocating. It is so quiet you can hear the sharp, nervous intakes of breath. Listen to the slow, agonizingly careful dipping of the wooden oars into the black water. Pull, glide, pull, glide. Every single drop of water falling from the oars sounds incredibly loud. One mistake, one dropped tool, one loud whisper, and the forts will rain iron death upon them. Looming ahead in the darkness, like a ghost, is the massive silhouette of the captured USS Philadelphia. She is riding quietly at anchor, her guns loaded, guarded by corsair sentries. The Intrepid glides closer, closer. The wooden hulls touch with a soft, ominous thud. And then, the silence shatters. The American sailors surge over the rails. There are no muskets fired. Gunfire would alert the entire city. The violence is quiet, intimate, and brutally fast. It is the heavy, wet sound of steel cutting through the cold night air. The struggle is desperate, fought in the dark shadows of the wooden deck. Within minutes, the ship is taken. but they cannot sail her out. The wind is dead, and the ship has no masts. There is only one terrible option left. They must destroy their own creation. Listen to the frantic splashing of highly flammable whale oil being poured over the dry wooden decks, soaking into the heavy ropes and the canvas. The sharp smell of sulfur fills the air. A flint is struck. A tiny spark catches. And then the night explodes. A blinding, furious rush of orange and yellow fire rapidly consumes the massive oak timbers. The heat is incredibly intense, pushing back the cold winter air. The flames roar, a deafening, crackling monster eating the ship alive. The fire races down the hatches, reaching the dark belly of the hull. The Intrepid pushes away, the men rowing frantically to escape the inferno. Behind them, the majestic Philadelphia burns down to the waterline. The fire is so bright it illuminates the entire city of Tripoli, casting long, terrifying shadows against the ancient stone walls. The heavy cannons on the burning ship, heated by the flames, begin to discharge randomly into the city. A final, chaotic bombardment from a dying giant. It is a beautiful, tragic, and utterly terrifying beacon of defiance. The message is written in fire across the night sky. We will not be extorted. We will burn our own ships before we let you use them against us. The war drags on, spilling over from the ocean onto the unforgiving land. Shift your imagination away from the burning water and feel the dry, blistering heat of the Libyan desert. It is the spring of 1805. The sand is deep, shifting under the heavy boots of a ragtag army led by an American named William Eaton. They are marching across the brutal wilderness to attack the city of Derna from the land. Feel the agonizing thirst, the cracked lips, the blinding glare of the sun reflecting off the endless dunes. It is a slow, punishing crawl through a hostile landscape. When the battle finally comes, it is a desperate, bloody struggle in the hot sand. But when the smoke finally clears, a piece of fabric is raised on a wooden pole over the captured fortress. It is the American flag, flying over foreign soil in victory for the very first time. The heavy, bloody price has been paid. The long nightmare in the dark is slowly drawing to a close. If you are lying with your eyes closed right now, let the sound of the distant cannons slowly fade away into the dark. Let the deep, rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves wash over the ashes of the burning ships, carrying the remnants of 2 centuries ago down into the silent abyss. The war eventually ended, as all wars inevitably do. Treaties were signed, ink drying on heavy parchment, and the surviving American prisoners were finally brought out of the damp, cold dungeons to see the sun once more. They sailed back across the Atlantic, leaving the Mediterranean behind. But peace, in the grand sweep of history, is rarely a permanent state. It is usually just a quiet pause, a slow intake of breath between the chapters of human conflict. When we look back at the Barbary Wars from the comfort of the present day, it is easy to draw simple lines of good and evil. It is easy to see the corsairs as monsters and the American sailors as pure martyrs. But the ocean, in its vast and cold wisdom, does not recognize these human moralities. It only sees the endless, desperate struggle for survival. The Pasha of Tripoli was playing a brutal game of survival in a harsh, unforgiving landscape, using the only leverage he had. The young United States was fiercely protecting its economic lifeblood, fighting for the right to exist in a world dominated by apex predators. There is a profound, almost tragic beauty in this realization. No one is entirely right, and no one is entirely wrong in the grand flow of time. There is only the ceaseless, churning cycle of human ambition, fear, and the desperate need to control the uncontrollable. Now, let us leave the 19th century behind. Feel the wooden deck beneath your feet slowly transform into cold, hard steel. We are drifting back to the present moment, back to the dark waters of the Red Sea tonight. Listen to the low, mechanical thrum of the massive engines. Look up at the sky. There are no wooden frigates with canvas sails here. There are only colossal container ships carrying the wealth of the modern world, navigating through the very same narrow, treacherous straits. And waiting in the shadows of the rugged coastline, a new generation of players has emerged. The Houthi forces, armed not with iron cannons, but with sleek, modern missiles and silent drones, are staring out at the water. They are imposing their own toll on the ocean, disrupting the flow of global empires, challenging the very navy that was born from this exact same conflict over 200 years ago. It is a stunning, almost unbelievable historical echo. The United States Navy, which forged its first iron and cut its first oak to protect merchant ships from North African corsairs, finds itself in the exact same waters, fighting the exact same battle, just with different weapons. The actors have changed their costumes. The stage has been upgraded with radar and satellite imagery, but the script is terrifyingly identical. It is the endless, repeating loop of history, a continuous cycle of power, resistance, and the heavy price of the ocean. But here is the ultimate comforting truth that the ocean teaches us. It does not matter if a ship is made of rotting wood or impenetrable steel. It does not matter if an empire is young and shivering, or old and overwhelmingly powerful. Given enough time, the salt, the water, and the wind will claim everything. The grandest warships will eventually rust and turn to dust. The most powerful rulers will become nothing more than a few lines in a forgotten book. The intense, burning conflicts of today, the anxieties that keep the modern world awake at night, will one day be as quiet and irrelevant as the ashes of the USS Philadelphia resting at the bottom of the Tripoli harbor. Everything is temporary. Every storm eventually runs out of rain. Every raging fire eventually runs out of wood. The deep ocean remains completely undisturbed by the chaos on its surface. So, if the weight of the world feels too heavy tonight, if your mind is racing with the anxieties of your own life, remember the vast, silent depths of the sea. Your worries, no matter how overwhelming they may seem right now, are just ripples on the surface. They will pass. The historical tides will continue to ebb and flow, and the world will keep turning just as it always has. You do not need to fight the current tonight. You do not need to build a ship or forge a weapon. You only need to let go. Let your breathing match the slow, steady rhythm of the tide coming in and going out, coming in and going out. Let the darkness of the room wrap around you like a warm, protective blanket. If this journey through the echoes of the past has brought you a moment of peace, a moment of stillness in a chaotic world, please remember to subscribe and leave a gentle like. We will travel together again, exploring the quiet corners of history tomorrow night. But for now, surrender to the silence, sleep well, and may you find calm in the deep waters of your dreams.